Hello, assassins, and welcome to your most recent recap of the data we have in our library. Now, this data is meant to be reviewed while you are doing your assassin training, so please do keep that in mind that you do not need to be looking at the screen. We start our story of Captain Edward Kenway. In Cape Bona Vista in June 1715, Edward Kenway and his pirate brethren are stuck in a shootout with the Royal Navy where they end up losing, and Kenway swims to shore alongside an assassin. A chase ensues, and Kenway ends up taking up the mantle of the assassin after killing him. A year earlier, Kenway is talking to his lover about how he was going to become a pirate. But in the present time, Kenway saves a man called Steve Bonnet from some British soldiers. He lies to Steve and tells him he is on a secret mission from the king to get to Havana and meet with the governor, and tells Steve that his name is Duncan. This succeeds, and Steve let him captain his ship to Havana. The reason why Kenway chose to take on this identity is that he found a note and an artifact among the corpse of Duncan Walpole, the assassin that he killed. So, Kenway decides that for a bit of money, he is going to continue Duncan's mission. Kenway escorts Steve on a shipment to some merchants, and Steve lends Kenway some money to buy a new sword while he escorts him. Kenway then heads to the top of a church to get a lay of the land, leaving Steve undefended, and leaving him to get robbed. Kenway chases down the robber and gets back the stolen goods, then reunites Steve, and they head to a tavern nearby to meet the merchants. Here, Kenway gets in a brawl after being identified as a pirate. This alerts the guards and they chase after him, but he uses smoke bombs to get away. Steve ends up getting hurt and his sugar stolen by the Spanish guards. Edward hunts down some high-ranking officers, then goes into a fort and retrieves the sugar. However, he ends up stealing something from the fort and abandoning the sugar. However, he tells Steve he couldn't manage to get the sugar out. He also tells Steve his real name as he goes to meet with the governor. During the meeting with the governor, during which he uses the false name Duncan, he is taught to shoot by someone named Julian and the governor. He was given wrist blades to replace his that were beyond repair from Julian, who tells him they were souvenirs of battle. Edward is forced to show the Templars how assassins take care of business, with some training dummies on a course. Next, he is sent to meet another governor. This one is Governor Torres. He hands him a glass box and a note that the true assassin had on him at the time of his clock running out. Edward finds out that the Templars are looking for a powerful device that allows the Templars to spy on everyone, and they will soon know of its location because they have a man called the Sage in captivity. The Sage is the only one who could reveal the location of the device because he has magic powers that we now know to be the powers related to the Isu. Governor Torres requests Edward to come to the docks near the Castillo first thing the next morning. The Templars meet at the docks and reveal the seer's name is Roberts, and the blood of the seer is needed to open the observatory. Edward ends up helping the Templars bring the seer to the governor's residence while fighting off assassins along the way. However, the seer gets away during one of these attacks, and Edward has to hunt him down. Edward talks with Bonnet, complaining about his payment, and ends up planning on stealing the seer so he could sell the observatory to the highest bidder. So he breaks into the governor's palace to break the seer out, but this is when he realized it was a trap, and he was found out by the Templars. Edward has a flashback to when his fiance's father disapproved of him for the first time. This is before he wakes up on a ship. He frees himself, his fellow prisoners in the ship fleet, steal a ship, escape a hurricane, and name the ship the Jackdaw. He also finds out his quartermaster is called Adewale. Adewale tells Edward to go hunting, and he agrees to it. Edward would then craft a second pistol holder. After doing so, Adewale also gives him a pistol. Then they head to a pirate camp called Nasir. Edward ends up meeting up with three old friends, Ed Thatch, James Kidd, and Hornigold. After a swift drink, Edward goes and recruits members for his crew. Edward stops a hanging, then goes back to his friends. He would reveal to his friends a map of the observatory that he got from the slave ship he was on. Then he meets his friends at the shore. Hornigold teaches Edward how to sail his ship properly and how to plunder. They incapacitate and plunder a schooner. Then they sail to the Salt Key and buy the intermediate hull. After doing so, Edward's friends tell him to go out and attack naval ships. To do so, attack any ship Edward sees fit till the Navy would come to stop him. After doing as he was told, he would buy the broadside cannons, and Adewale told Edward of a plan to meet with Captain Kidd to steal from a plantation. Edward would meet with Captain Kidd on a small island, mentioning how Captain Kidd is the son of the late William Kidd before speaking to Kidd. Mentions how ships coming from the plantation on a small island sell some goods. Kidd tells Edward to look for the agent of the plantation owner, and it would lead him to a lot of gold. Edward would follow the agent to his ship, then follow him by sail to the plantation. Once getting to the plantation, he would run over to where the agent got off the ship and hide in the field to eavesdrop on the agent. Edward finds out via eavesdropping that the agent doesn't know where the warehouse key is and uses his eagle vision to locate it. After locating the key, he would use it to raid the warehouse. Then he would sail off to Salt Lagoon to meet with Kidd and Thatch. They planned to steal a Spanish ship to guard Nassau. Thatch leads the pirates to steal the El Arca del Maestro. They find the ship and end up tailing it. Another pirate would end up trying to take the ship, causing Edward and his crew to have to avoid mortar fire. Then Edward and his crew would be attacked by a Spanish fleet and would have to abandon trying to take the El Arca del Maestro. And they end up seeing a ship sailed to an island that is owned by Julian Ducasse, one of the Templars from earlier. They end up waiting until nightfall, so that way Julian can't see Edward's ship. Edward gives his men a speech, and they agree to stealing the ship. After running through a jungle, Edward would get rid of Julian Ducasse, taking the ship and the cove it was parked in. It is at this point that I should address the agent that we sent into Abstergo in order to recover this data. We managed to get them past Templar background checks in order to act as just another playtester for their Assassin's Creed games that are, quite honestly, over-dramatizing the effects that happened in more modern games, but to be honest, kind of fun to play. But they get woken up from their animus by Mulaney, the assistant of the CCO. She shows us and explains that the more excellent the employee, the more trophies they get. She also says how the CCO, Oliver, Olive wants to speak with us and bring us to his office. We also get a call from John in IT. However, after seeing the tracker that says we are on our way to the CEO's office, he says he will call again after the meeting. We find Olive talking with someone named Vitsia and convincing her not to cancel the Kenway project. He talks with us about how he wants to focus on finding any leads to the observatory, then sends us off as he takes a call. John has us hack into a colleague's computer via higher access he gives us, and we find the post-mortem of Desmond, an assassin who saved the world. Then, before giving that data to the courier, we hack every other computer we can for more lore. Then we head back to the Animus. As we get back in the Animus, we can see the memory of Caroline leaving Edward. Then flash forward to 1716 in the Great Iguana Cove. He then follows James Kidd to a Mayan stone site and completes the cover. Then he follows Kidd into a secret dungeon and up a set of stairs, exploring the island like excited children. They find a big house with a cage with Templar gear in it. He sees James Kidd off and tells him where to meet up to tell him more about the observatory. He then goes on a Templar hunt. Edward starts by meeting an assassin named Opia and tells her about him selling the map of the assassins to the Templars, so in order to earn her trust, they participate in a hunting competition. After killing a white jaguar, Opia tells him to meet her at the Grand Cayman to continue the hunt. After doing so, Edward looks for a man called Alvin to find out what the Templars are doing in the small fishing village. After finding the man, he would eavesdrop on him and ends up stealing a ledger from the man who talks about the Templar Marquise and a man under her employment. They go to question Vargas. Opia has Edward hide from sight just in case he ends up running onto a ship. After incapacitating the ship, Edward and Opia finds out that Marquez has already fled to Juventud, the island of enemies. There's been a peace treaty there since the death of her father, but if she pays high enough, she could convince others to break the treaty. So Opia takes Vargas's ship and has Edward meet her at Juventud. Once they meet, they tail a nearby soldier to Marquise and take her out while also getting Edward his key. Next, he meets a woman called Rona. At the time, her assassin bureau is under attack and she has him help her defend it. After doing so, Rona has Edward look into an increase in thieves and criminals around the market. He would find a pickpocket and chase him down, then find a map about a gunpowder and storehouse owned by a Templar named Hilary Flint. So, Edward would go blow up her powder reserves after Rona tells him to. Once successful, Edward meets up with Rona and she allows Edward to do the finishing blow on Flint. Next, he heads to Kingston and speaks with the black assassin there named Anto. He finds out that he needs help freeing some slaves by listening to some soldiers to find out where the slaves are. After chasing some guards that started running away, Edward finds out that the slaves are held up near the windmill. Reporting this to Anto, he says his debt is paid, but after a bit of convincing, Edward goes with the assassin to free the slaves under the Templar control. Next, they meet in front of the bureau, and Anto, Edward, and the freed slaves all defend it. Edward has a change of character after this moment. Up to this moment, he was only focused on the key, but he's now focused on justice against the Templar, Kenneth Abraham. Anto reveals to Edward a man located in Kenneth's inner circle, so Edward tails him to Kenneth until Kenneth is no more. Finally, he goes to Nassau to meet with Vance Travers. He notes some suspicious men poking about that work for a Templar called Upton, and he asks Edward to take care of them. Edward would eavesdrop on Upton's men, and they would talk about Upton's smuggling operations and lead Kenway to Upton. It turns out Vance tricked Kenway because Vance is Upton's blood brother, but wants him dead for some reason. Upon returning to the Assassin Bureau, Upton tells Edward how a woman called Jin Lang, a pirate from far-off seas, has stolen his brother's heart and they became inseparable. Upton believes this has something to do with the map he and his brother bought from a pirate a bit back, that the brothers each keep a half to. From doing as Upton says and listening to him talk with his brother from afar, then tailing Vance, Edward finds out that Jin Lang is a Templar and has convinced Vance to get his brother killed for his half of the map. Edward goes and stops a hitman from taking out Upton, then tells Upton to get out of Nassau. However, despite the warning, Upton gets drunk due to his despair, and Edward takes him to a safe location, or at least he tries before a drunk Upton starts a bar fight. Then he takes Upton to a safe location. The following morning, Upton sends Edward to take out both Vance and Jing. He takes them both down easily, but Jing says her husband has the real map, bringing into question why she was sticking around. Nevertheless, with all 5 keys, Edward returns to Great Iguana and retrieves the Templar armor. The Pride of the Templars, a light, flexible armor that offers increased resistance to enemy attacks. Edward then finally goes to meet with James Kidd at the island. He would sneak past a handful of assassins and meet with Kidd. When he did, he would be confronted by the assassins as to why he killed Duncan Walpole, the assassin from the beginning, and still gave the info he had to the Templars. Edward said money was his only goal, and this pisses off the Master Assassin, who is only calmed down when Kidd tells him that Edward has eagle vision. Before leaving, the Master Assassin would ask Edward if he saw the sage and could identify him again, and Edward says yes. While going through some ruins, Kidd tells Edward the assassin he just talked to was Al-Tabai, his mentor. He also tells about the Creed and how the Templars now have the upper hand thanks to Edward. After a statue puzzle, another statue is revealed in the Mayan temple. It was a statue of the sage, even though it was hundreds of years old. After explaining how the Templars put the sage's blood in a clear box before the sage escaped, and Kidd revealed he has a box like it, he says that they are done here. They meet up with Al-Tabai, who says a new sage has been found and the race for the observatory begins anew. He also shows how Kenway selling his maps to the Templars have led to them finding the assassins and has currently led to the slaughter and his men being captured. Kidd has Edway clean up his own mess, and after saving the assassins and pirates alike, Edward is told by Kidd that a Dutch slaver named Lorenz Prins is behind this attack and he has been an enemy for years. Al-Tabai absolves Edward of his crimes but says he is not welcome on the island. Kidd explains that Edward brings shame to their order and how the assassins killed the Templars who seek to rule the world. Then, Kidd shows about assassin contracts to Edward. Kid then shows the way to a Mayan door that Edward can put all his Mayan stones in, and tells Edward he is staying here for now. In January 1717, Art Nassau Edward is at a bar when two new pirates approach, about to cause trouble, when Captain Thatch interrupts. These men say how the Governor Torres is to be receiving gold from a nearby fort. Thatch calls the pirates as Captain Vane and Master Rucktham. On the way to the fort holding the gold, Edward and Adewale talk, and Adewale tells Edward that he is wrong in assuming Adewale is from Africa, as he was born in Trinidad and a slave from his first breath. He tells Edward no country in the world would be more welcoming than the country of the Jackdaw, where he knows everyone and they know him. In the fort they find General Torres and interrogate him to find out the sage, who had escaped 2 years ago at this point, has been found and the gold is in the ransom. Lawrence Prince is actually the one to have found the sage and is in Kingston. Edward tells Torres that they will be recovering the sage Edward's way, with Torres and his gold. Once in Kingston, Edward plans to have Torres meet with Prince with some of the reward money and say the rest is close behind, and once they see the sage, the pirates bring in the rest of the gold and make the trade so they can get away. Adewale says Edward is risking the trust of his men by trading with a slaver. Unfortunately, Kidd is there too, as pointed out by Adewale. Turns out he is here to kill Torres, but after finding out about the sage, he stays his blade until the sage is rediscovered. While tailing Torres, it turns out he is no longer the governor because he quit. Even more unfortunately, Prince realizes they were followed and Torres gets away while Edward and Kidd are ambushed. Kidd tries to go after Prince due to lack of patience, and Edward has to track him down and stop him. After doing so, Edward meets with Kidd on top of a windmill and talks strategy to sneak into a plantation and free the sage. It is at this point James Kidd reveals he is actually a she. After sabotaging the bells of the plantation, Edward meets back up with Kidd and she manages to trick the guards into letting her into the gate. Once inside the gate, Edward would slay Prince, but the sage takes Kidd hostage until Kidd escapes, but the sage sets off the alarm, causing Kenway and Kidd to run away. After the escape, Kidd would say that her name is Mary Reed, but tells Kenway not to tell anyone. Kenway then went back to Nassau, where in January of 1718, Vane, Thatch, and Hornigold discussed a pardon made by the British government for any pirate that wanted it. Thatch has Kenway walk with him, and Hornigold, where Hornigold wants to lay low to not tick off the king, but Thatch laughs in his face. Hornigold talks about how he finds the Republic of Nassau disgusting and filthy. Kenway suggests getting a diving bell to get medicine from a sunken wreckage. Once obtaining the diving bell, Kenway does just that. Edward would meet with Thatch and point him in the direction of some wrecks that haven't been scoured. Also, it turns out Steve Bonnet became a member of Thatch's crew. After an uneventful dive, besides a shark attack, Thatch and Edward argue about what to do next since the only medicine they could find was spoiled. Edward ends up meeting with Hornigold and finds out that Thatch opened fire on a British man-of-war to obtain medicine. Edward heads out to bring Thatch home, and after locating Thatch's ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, Edward would rush in to save Thatch from the pirates surrounding him. Turns out Thatch was after a galleon and would have Kenway help him chase it down in his ship. Then, when they boarded the galleon, Edward was sent after the captain, and he would take him out, and it turns out the medicine was destined for Charlestown, which is where Edward suggests going. Steve Bonnet says he is not destined for a life of piracy, and Thatch says to meet him in Charlestown 1 month from that day. Edward met with Steve before the sieges of Charlestown and said goodbye. That night, Edward finds Thatch with hostages he was trying to exchange for medicines. Turns out he had been trying for 6 days with no results, even though his peace party hadn't come back. Edward goes to deal with it in the stupidest way of trying to stealth with a giant pirate ship. The British had to be blind even with the fog at night because Kenway made it past. About halfway through, Edward had to abandon the ship and follow on foot, eventually eavesdropping on the captain of Charlestown, and it turns out the supply key is with him. Edward would deal with the captain and return with 2 crates and the recipe for more medicine. Thatch tells Edward to go ahead as he has business to the north. When Edward confronts him, Thatch admits he is retiring. Soon, Mulaney wakes up the agent and says the boss wants to make a trailer with some of the footage that the agent has collected. Mulaney has the agent stay outside the office while she and the boss talk real quick, but John from IT says to go open up the security feed for him. When the agent does, they find Oliver talking with someone over the phone called Latita, who wants him to do 2 times the research he is doing now and says the entertainment stuff is to cover the bills. When Oliver, after the phone call, says they will focus on the observatory, John has the agent go back to hack Oliver's computer for info on the shareholders meeting he is going to. It says Abstergo is run by Templars, but tries to pass it off as a joke by saying the moon landing was faked. After getting the info off the computer, John says to meet the courier down in the lobby, and with that finished, the agent returns to work. When the agent gets back in the Animus, they see Caroline telling Edward if he leaves to be a pirate, she can't promise she will come back to him. In July 1718 in Nassau, Annie Bonny, the barmaid, asks what Edward is doing, and he tells her he is writing a letter to Caroline when Mr. Rackham interrupts. That conversation is interrupted by a gunshot. When Edward checks it out, he finds that the British have returned, led by Woodes Rogers, the Templar, and he is seeking to speak with Thatch, Hornigold, and Vane. After telling them, Edward finds out that the British have come to take over Nassau. They take over the fort, so Edward sneaks in. Edward would steal the British plans and listens to them threaten Thatch, Hornigold, and Vane. Hornigold wants to take it because he thinks they have nothing to do with Nassau. Vane and Thatch think otherwise. Edward would meet with Thatch at the pub, and they decided to head out that night and regroup at Edward's compound using a burning ship to break through the barricades surrounding the harbor of Nassau. After gathering the gunpowder barrels, Thatch and Edward would overhear a higher-up British soldier giving the order to sink every ship in the harbor tonight. Edward goes and takes care of the Commodore Chamberlain, who was supposed to give the signal to do it tonight. With the Commodore taken care of, Edward meets with Thatch. They clear out the galleon of the British, and then he escorts it to the barricade. Once they make it through, Thatch and Vane celebrate, which Adewale doesn't approve of. In the Great Iguana, October 1718, Kidd wakes up Edward from sleeping with a woman. Turns out Thatch flew the coop at some point, and Vance is off to see him, and Edward will follow soon. Kidd gets angry at Edward for still believing in the do-what-you-want mentality. Edward heads north to find Thatch. Edward and Vance find Thatch and his crew, and Thatch decides to stay in the north. However, Thatch tells about a slaver named Roberts who drives a ship called the Princess. However, before that info can be acted upon, Edward sees a shady man and follows. It turns out this man was a spy for the British. The man sent out a signal for the British to attack, so Edward and the other pirates sail out and attack the man of war up front. However, unfortunately, Thatch was brought to his knees with a slice from a sword after being tossed a gun by Edward. He would shoot a man off of him, but gets sliced down by a coward from behind. Thatch's final words were, "In a world without gold, we might have been heroes." So would be the life of Edward Thatch, captain of the Queen Anne's Revenge, the infamous Blackbeard. Then a British man pushed Edward off of the ship. He swam back to the Jackdaw and sailed out of there. When Adewale asks about Thatch, Edward was quiet and told his crewmate that Thatch drinks damnation. Edward would meet with Vance and they would share their woes after Blackbeard's death, but Vance would finally give in to Edward's observatory plan and they go find the princess. Vance says to start looking with the Royal African Company's ships. So Edward, Vance, and Rackham go to look for the Royal African ship. Unfortunately, during the boarding, Vance's ship would get badly damaged and he had to join Kenway. After the Royal African Company's ship was boarded, they are informed that Roberts sails out of Kingston. However, Rackham's crew commits mutiny against Edward and Vane, and he also says he is going to sell off Adewale. Edward and Vane end up stranded on the island of Isla Providencia, where Vane goes mad. Edward has to find him. During the search for Vance, it turns out that he found guns, and instead of hunting with them, he tries to kill Kenway. Unfortunately, due to the madness, Kenway had to put down Vane. With Vane dead, Kenway finds a ship pulling into the cove. In the Great Iguana, May 1719, Edward has made it back, and Kidd informs him Rackham didn't last 2 months with the ship before limping back to Nassau and taking the pardon, and Adewale is still free. Kidd tries to get Kenway to join the assassins, but he still refuses. Now, Kenway goes after Roberts. Adewale finds a man who works for the Royal African Company, and he says he hasn't seen the princess in 8 or more weeks, so she should be back soon. There was other people asking about the princess, a sailor in plain rags and a man with a scar across his eye. The man says they are staying just around the corner, and Adewale says the crew is getting tired of these fantasies. It turns out the men looking for the princess are Hornigold and Rogers. Hornigold has joined the Templars. The observatory needs blood samples to spy on a man, and all Templars have given the Grand Master a blood sample which has been shipped to a Templar safe house in Rio de Janeiro. When Hornigold and Rogers met with the Grand Master, it turns out that the princess was taken by pirates 6 weeks ago, and the sage is still on board. The Templars are searching for the princess in Africa. However, Hornigold notices the Jackdaw in the harbor and knows Kenway has been following them. Edward has to fight his way out and escape. Returning back to the Jackdaw, Edward sails for Principe in Africa. Roberts encounters Kenway at a camp where they make peace, and Robert says his captain was killed in a Portuguese ambush. Roberts tells Edward the Templars, Burgess and Cockram, must not leave the island alive with word of his escape. After taking out the two, they say how, when all went to crap, the Templars took them in. When they asked if the Templars are their family, where is his? Edwards returns to Roberts, who promises if Edwards lends him aid, in 2 months' time, west of the Leeward Islands, Edward will get his answers. September 1719, Roberts and Edward are discussing the human need to have a creed. Edward is given the location to sail to, and once there he discusses with Roberts the plan to take down a galleon that has the treasure Roberts seeks. Then intend to use a Portugal flag on the dark and foggy night to get as close to their target as possible so they locate a Portuguese ship, and Edward says he is intending to get blood vials from the fleet and that he wants them intact. Once the flag is grabbed, they locate a ship that has people unloading something from it. Edward goes to investigate and finds only 86 gold and some empty blood vials. Tailing the ship again on the Jackdaw, Edward says what he found, then asks where the Portuguese captain is, and is ticked when he is told Roberts killed the man. After following the ship, Roberts tells Edward to go take the ship and sail it out of there, and after taking out the watchman, they stole the ship but were spotted and had to blast their way out of there. It turns out the blood was the blood of the Templars, and when Edward asks Roberts to bring him to the observatory, at first Roberts laughed in his face but soon accepted Edward to come along. When they went to look at the observatory, Roberts points out Edward was followed, and Adewale looks through the spyglass to see it was Hornigold, so Edward has to go take care of it. While they look for Hornigold's ship, Adewale wants Edward to bring the assassins to protect the observatory, but Edward is still focused on the money. And after eliminating Hornigold, Edward returns to Roberts and asks why he knows where to find it. Roberts says it is because he was born with the memories from a previous life. Edward is sent ahead to deal with the island guardians, and when he does, Roberts opens the door and kills his men because he says they would have gone mad seeing what's inside, but Edward is made of stronger stuff. He has Edward bring the box inside, monologuing about how it has been over 80 millennia since he has been inside. On the way, they see more blood vials belonging to an ancient race. When placing down the vials, the temple starts shaking due to a security measure, and Roberts turns it off. He then shows Edward how the thing is used as a massive spyglass, using the blood of the people to spy on them in real life. They see Kid trying to get a woman to join their crew. They then spy on Governor Woodes Rogers and see him speaking with a man discussing plans for the government, and he is trying to get a sample from each member of the government for when they obtain access to the observatory. Edward mentions how they can become masters of the ocean with such a device after Roberts powers it down by taking out the crystal-encased viewing skull, only for Roberts to backhand Edward into the water below, backstabbing him as Edward has outlived his usefulness. Edward escapes the observatory, running into a poison dart, and tries to make it back to the ship, only to find it is gone and to be taken down by Robert's crew. He is then taken into custody and handed over to the British Navy by Roberts. Then, the agent wakes up in a weird room where Mulaney speaks to them over the intercom, saying there have been so many security breaches and now Oliver is missing for 2 days, and that the agent will be staying down there till the hacker is found. Once Mulaney stops talking with the agent, the hacker man contacts them. He gives level 3 security clearance, then sends the agent to wipe all the dirt the Templars have on them. He gets Mulaney out of the security room for the agent to hack the cameras, and the cameras show Mulaney and head of IT John arguing about how this is going to take for them to look through what the hacker found. John assures her it will only be a week tops, but she still isn't comfortable with it taking that long. Soon he takes her to get coffee, and once at the coffee stand, he slips away so he can get a program to wipe any evidence of the agent hacking the servers. The thing the agent sees while deleting this info is the Templars' ad for the Edward Kenway game, Pirates of Nightmares. On the way out, a hologram pops up of the Isu, Juno, and she talks to John, saying she is too spread out to find who she is looking for, and proceeds to talk about how the cataclysm pushed all doubt aside. She also says that there are more artifacts to find before she will become realized, and to make her whole again, that is their purpose. John starts freaking out because Juno was supposed to take over our minds apparently, but she spared the agent from some reason. Then the agent returns to the Animus, and they pop back up in Port Royal, Jamaica, April 1720, where Mary Read and Anne Bonny are found guilty of their crimes. Edward is sat down and the Templars sit behind him, telling him they have found out about his past, his parents, and his lover. They try to get Edward to tell them the location of the observatory, but he doesn't give it up. Mary and Anne are sentenced to be hung. However, the girls announce they are pregnant to save more time, so the judge says their sentences will be held until they are no longer pregnant. 4 months later, Edward is in a hanging cage, but by rattling the bars, he distracts the guards so the assassins can free him. The assassin says he is only there for Anne and Mary, but frees Edward on the terms he helps. They find Mary in bad condition after she's had her child, and Anne is in labor. They head out of the prison, however, unfortunately, on the way out, Mary died. Her last words to Edward being that she wished he would finish the mission. So ended Mary Read, Captain James Kidd. Edward made it to the boat, and after asking what will he do next, and being told nothing sensible, the assassin gives him Duncan Walpole's uniform. Edward ends up getting drunk and having a bad dream where he is taunted by Roberts with memories of his dead friends, the shipwreck that put him on this path, images of the Templars, Caroline asking and ridiculing him why she wasn't enough for him, Mary asking who does he have left in his care, begging him to change course and be a builder before he wakes up on a beach with Adewale waking him up. Adewale then leaves Edward, saying his path is elsewhere. Edward, now recovering from his lowest point, heads to the assassins where he finds Adewale, saying the damage he did there 6 years ago has not been undone. Adewale had joined the assassins since Edward last saw him. Edward proceeds to talk about how his greed has ruined him and left none he cared for standing. And then he asks the assassins to help him fulfill Mary's last wish. As they talk, the signal is given that another attack was underway. Edward helps fend it off. Afterwards, he was welcomed by the assassins to stay on the island, and he talked with Anne, who lost her child. They talk about how everyone they used to know are gone and how they feel empty inside because of it. In May 1721, Edward is talking with the Grand Master that he knows what Torres and Rogers look like, but as to how he gets close to them, the Grand Master told him to visit the Bureau of the Assassins in the city. When Edward mentions the Grand Master will be nowhere near there, the Grand Master tells Edward he believes he will find him. Anne, as the new quartermaster of the Jackdaw, tells Edward they are still on a course for Kingston. He meets with the assassin on Kingston and is told Woodes Rogers is attending a small political function before King George calls him back to London. The assassin tells Edward and Anne to get a disguise from the visiting diplomat that has been on the assassin radar for a while. However, before he goes, Edward has a message sent to Caroline via the assassin connections. Once he takes out the diplomat, Edward sneaks into the party and takes out Rogers. However, in the memory corridor, Rogers says Roberts is in Principale. Edward reports to the assassins, then heads out for Principale, Africa. They, however, find the wreckage of a ship with an alive crew member saying it was Robert's ship, the Royal Fortune, and he gave no reason or mercy. When they finally make it to Africa, Roberts is there, and Edward makes his way to Roberts to assassinate him. Roberts does, for a time, get away on his ship, and Edward has to chase him down. However, once killing Roberts on his ship, in the memory corridor, Roberts speaks about a she that might have had use for Edward. She lies in wait, and Roberts wishes he could have opened the door and heard her speak his name, but he was too stubborn and born too soon. Roberts then gives Edward the key to the observatory with one final wish, to have his body destroyed so the Templars can't get him. With Roberts dead, Edward returns to Havana, where he meets with a female assassin who affirms that Havana is under curfew due to Torres, thinking somebody is coming after him. Using the blood of Torres, they can see that he is by the church, using the key to the observatory. He gives the key to the assassin, then goes to find and kill Torres. He ends up finding a man called El Tiburon and following him. El Tiburon leads him back to the fort in Havana, and Edward sneaks his way through the fort and takes out Torres. Or, that is what he believed, until Edward turned the man to face him, showing that it was a body double. Edward had to then fight his way out. However, before making his escape, Edward killed El Tiburon, and he makes it back to the Assassin Bureau, only to be told Torres has left the city and now went west to the observatory. Edward plans on bringing the key just to rub it in Torres' face that he has it before Torres is killed. After blasting his way through the Templar armada, blocking the cove and making it through the forest to the observatory, and being accompanied by Anne, Edward has her stay outside so she can stand guard. Inside, he finds Torres' men being eviscerated by the traps, engaging in one final battle, dodging traps of the Templar, goons, and the temple. Edward finally manages to kill Torres. With Torres dead, the headmaster of the Brotherhood, Alitabai, Anne, and Adewale return the Piece of Eden to its rightful place, and Adewale recommends calling this place Kenway's Folly. They plan to lock the temple till another sage appears. Edward mentions how the vials of ancient blood are gone, so Atabai says they will reclaim them before the Templars get wind of this. Edward says he will join once he fixes what he messed up back home, but Atabai gives a note explaining something surprising. Outside the Animus, the agent wakes up to the IT guy, who is actually the sage, explaining how we saw Juno and how her not entering our body was wrong. How the Isu created humans to be tools, and how one day soon he hopes her second coming happens. However, with someone knocking at the door, he injects the agent with something before Abstergo guards come in and save the agent along with Melanie. The agent wakes up and Milani tells the agent that they were given a far less than lethal dose. And they were cleared of suspicion and everything was placed on John. Then the agent is contacted by Sean and Rebecca, who thank them for all the data retrieving. John was supposed to be their man on the inside, and they want the agent to recover the rest of the data. In the Animus, in the Great Iguana, October 1722, the assassins have now made it their base. Adewale said Wood Rogers escaped his injury and returned to England, and Edward says he will finish the man off when he returns. He then talks to Anne and asks her to accompany him, but she says no and she won't stay with the assassins either. As Edward is saying he will return one day, a pirate calls out, "A ship is coming into the dock." Edward imagines all his lost friends sitting and sharing a drink before heading down to the dock and meeting with his daughter, who Caroline left behind after her death. Later on, when Jennifer was an adult, Edward takes her and his new son Hatham to the theater. I hope you have enjoyed this recap of Edward Kenway's adventures and what our agent went through in the Animus. Unfortunately, the Templars are always twisting what they want the people to see. Sometimes, Abstergo puts out games like Assassin's Creed Black Flag or 2 Revelations Brotherhood, but other times they put out things like Black Flag Rescynced, which isn't going to tell the adventures of our agent, because the only reason that ended up in the game was that we had more agents go in to reveal the truth and sneak it into the final copy of the game. In any case, Agent, this is just one of many stories of our brotherhood. And one day, I hope to have gone over them all. This is the Librarian, signing out.